Welcome. My name is Tamara Lawson. I'm the Dean of the University I'm the Dean at St. Thomas University College of Law, and I'm here to welcome you to our Black History Month presentation 2021. At St. Thomas University, we are a very diverse community, and we recognize our unique contributions and collective mission. And at the College of Law, we regularly celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, Black History Month, and Women's History Month. And in 2021, began a new tradition of giving a Martin Luther King Jr. Award. Today, we gather to celebrate the significant contributions of African Americans and Blacks from the African diaspora. This tradition began in 1926 with Negro History Week, and in 1970, Black History Month was recognized nationally in the United States. Black History Month now has been recognized in the UK in 1987 and in Canada in 1995, and most recently in Ireland in 2010. And so we're so excited to continue that tradition here at our College of Law. And with that, I pass the floor for our invocation. As part of our tradition, we begin our events with prayer.
Thank you, Dean Lawson. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for the gift of life and brotherhood. In this month, which we celebrate Black history, we thank you for the many ways in which our Black brothers and sisters and their faith have enriched and continue to enrich the Church, making her a true witness of universality and completeness. As they continue to place this heritage at the service of the whole Church for the spread of the gospel, may the Holy Spirit continue his work of evangelization through them. And with a joyful and hopeful heart, we entrust all of us to the loving care of Mary, Mother of our Savior, Jesus Christ. May Mary, who both listened to the world and believed in the good, guide their and our lives to those of future generations of Black Christians with the one people of God and the one mystical body of Christ. Through her intercession, may her grace be to also with our current law students who will be taking their bar exams. May they receive the light and wisdom they need and experience God's peace and guidance. We ask all of this in your trusting and loving merciful care through your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you for the invocation. And without further ado, I introduce you to our university president, David A. Armstrong, JD.
Thank you, Dean Lawson, and welcome everyone to this wonderful webinar. We are so honored to have President Hoffler here today, especially during Black History Month. You know, people have criticized Black History Month by saying, why are we having 1 month? It should be 12 months. We all agree on that. But I look at Black History Month as a way to really, truly highlight the great contributions of the African-American people to this country. And so we will look at it in a positive light today. And we have such a positive light here with us with President Hoffler, and it's so awesome. But I'll give you 2 examples for me in my personal life of a lack of quality Black history. The Tulsa Massacre. I consider myself an educated person. I consider myself a historian. I did not know the devastation that occurred from the Tulsa Massacre until I started studying it in the last 2 years. And we had a Black Wall Street in Greenwood, Oklahoma, that was destroyed, people murdered, covered up. It was not in the newspaper. It was taken off the rolls in the libraries. That's insane. It's an abomination. And I was so happy to see the work that Dean Lawson has done on the National Bar Association. And she's met such wonderful people like President Hoffler, and we've had Ben Crump to St. Thomas University. And I got to spend time with Ben over Super Bowl weekend. And I learned, you know, I think it's wonderful, a wonderful organization, the NBA, giving opportunities for African-American lawyers. But I did not know that one of the reasons for its genesis is because lawyers, African-American lawyers, were not being allowed in the ABA. And I was a member of the ABA, and I did not know that. And that is, again, an abomination of how we're handling history and what we're doing with history. And so I am here at St. Thomas University because of its mission. St. Thomas University is a Catholic university with rich cultural and international diversity, committed to the academic and professional success of its students who go on to become ethical leaders in the global community. It's that diversity of our students and that we're training to become ethical leaders is what's so important to me. And I think we have the perfect person to be here to talk to our BALSA students, all our law students, in President Hoffler here today. And I know she will have a phenomenal message. And so thank you so much, President Hoffler, for being here. Thank you, students, and especially the BALSA students, for putting this together. And I cannot wait to hear the discussion and the questions to come from our wonderful students after. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, President Armstrong. And I just want to briefly, it's hard to briefly introduce President Hoffler, but I'm going to do my best. And my heart is full because I also consider her a friend and colleague. She has a very extensive bio, very successful career, obviously, right? Because she was elected by the lawyers, the 65,000 lawyers that she represents across the nation to be our president. She is barred in 5 states. She's a fellow Hoya from Georgetown, as I join her there. And she's been a very successful trial lawyer across the country, fighting for justice. She's the 78th president of the National Bar Association, but only the 14th female president of the organization. And that also adds to her significance in her role. We're at the end of Black History Month and almost the beginning of Women's History Month, so she represents both of those constituencies. And in her presidency, we talked about this briefly before the official webinar, she has an initiative for all law students to be engaged, BALSA students to be engaged in the national conversation of the National Bar Association, and she has taken it on as her clear initiative, the 3 pandemics that are facing our country this year: COVID-19, police brutality, and election suppression. There's so much more I could say about CK Hoffler, but I would like her to share her words with you directly. And without further ado, President Hoffler, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much, Dean Lawson. As I reflect on our friendship and the extraordinary contributions that you've made to the National Bar Association, being on the Board of Governors, being chair of the section that deals with professors, law professors, and students, the extraordinary work that you've done, and your mother as one of the chaplains of the National Bar Association. I just can't say enough about how grateful we are for your tenacity, your diligence, and always rising to the occasion. I don't have to tell you all at St. Thomas University about how extraordinary Dean Lawson is, because you see her every day. But I want to thank you for inviting me to this program. To your president, I have to just say, I went to schools that had a religious sort of foundation. I attended Georgetown University Law Center, but I also went to a school in Canada called Branksome Hall Girls' School, which was a Scottish school, and we had prayers every single morning. And I must say, that prayer took me back to the 70s. Yes, unfortunately, I have to talk in terms of 70s. I was alive in the 70s. Took me, and none of these students were alive in the 70s. We know this, but it took me back to prayers in the morning. But the thing about prayers is really just the inspiration that it gives you. So thank you so much for having me. To Jorge, I said thank you as well for helping to bring this together, this whole program together, and being my point of contact. But I want to especially say a word of thanks to the students, to the BALSA students, to Jamie, to McDaniel. Thank you so much for including me on this program. Of course, I step in some very big shoes. You had Ben Crump, one of our past presidents, speak last year. But I just can't thank you all enough for inviting me this year. And for my theme, I just want to talk to y'all for a little bit about what it means to refuse to be denied. To refuse to be denied. Because as you go through your journey as lawyers, no matter if you decide to be a corporate lawyer, to be an extraordinary professor and teach, to be a civil rights lawyer, to do employment discrimination work, to do personal injury work, whatever your passion, if you want to be successful, you must strive for excellence and you must refuse to be denied. What do I mean by that? And why did I pick that as a theme? Well, I picked that as a theme because refusing to be denied is a sense that is born in you. You have to be hungry. When someone tells you you can't do something, simply because they don't think that you're qualified to do something, that you're meant to do something, or they make a subjective determination that you're not good enough to do something. You must work harder, you must be better, and you must do what you need to do to refuse to be denied that opportunity. That's an example of refusing to be denied. Don't let anyone else define your journey. If you know, and when you know, you've worked as hard as you can work, you've crossed every T and dotted every I. And so that's the theme of my comments today. And so in talking to some others from in law schools about how I should talk to you all today, they suggested that it might be helpful if I took you through my journey of how I got to where I am today, so that we could have an informed discussion. You could ask questions about my background and ask me how I might feel I can be of further assistance to you. Because when you meet people like a Ben Crump, or you've got these great deans and great people at the school, you have to always take into consideration that every encounter is an opportunity for you to connect after the event. So if after this is all over, after my comments, you all would like to connect with me, please reach out to me, because that is part of what we do at the National Bar Association, firstly. But that's also my commitment to mentoring. That's my commitment. So Jorge, I think let's start with the first slide. I have a PowerPoint presentation just to keep me on track, to make sure I cover everything. And I've actually gone through the first 2 slides, where I've also already given a special word of thanks. And I'm going to go to the early years. So people often ask me, because just to give you some background, we can go to the next slide. My practice areas now consist of commercial litigation, which is like breach of contract, and things that involve commercial transactions that have gone wrong, employment discrimination cases, catastrophic injury cases, personal injury, medical negligence, opioid litigation, and I've done tobacco litigation in Florida. So what you all may not realize is that I used to practice in Florida. I still have some cases in Florida, but I practiced in Florida for almost 15 years. And I practiced with one of the greatest trial lawyers of all time, in my impression, and that's Willie Gary. I ran his commercial and international litigation department. So when we look at how I got to that place, or how I got to running my own firm now, I start with the early years. In terms of my history, my background, which I felt, when you look at your background, it doesn't matter what you have or don't have, because at the end of the day, it's where you're going. But I've been asked to share some of my background. So I was raised, at least for school, in a foreign country. I went to a school called Collège du Mans, which is outside of Geneva, Switzerland. And I went there when I was 5. I was in boarding school with other family members. And so if you can imagine, I'm originally from Buffalo, New York, at a young age going to boarding school. There were 4 of us in that school, and a cousin who was in college at American College in Les Unes, which wasn't so far from where we were. And that is where I first developed my language proficiency. And also my athletic prowess. Now I don't think I have any athletic prowess, but my 2 sons are very athletic, and I remind them that they got that from their mother. But anyway, the importance of that experience in Geneva, Switzerland, was that I was American abroad during a time when there was not a lot of exposure to African Americans. And you have to just go back. If you think of I'm going to take you through history. World War II, World War I. So Hitler, as you all probably know, used to say that Black people had tails. And while that's preposterous, it's crazy. I can tell you in 1968, and now I have to tell my age, when I was about hypothetically 6 years old, and walking through the woods in a town called Versoix in 1968, outside of Geneva, with a group of girls, including my 2 sisters. I actually had a little girl, point to me and say in French, "Look at the little monkeys." And that was in 1968. And while that was probably it's almost 50 years ago, that stayed with me, because I remembered that feeling of powerlessness, of feeling like the other, of not belonging, of feeling isolated, of feeling like I was not accepted, and I was already in a foreign country. But I remember that feeling of all the years, the 8 years at Collège de Léman, which was a great experience, it was an international school, and the 1 year at University of Geneva. When I think of my experience in that country, I think of that one thing that made me feel some kind of way in the 60s. Now, in the 60s in this country, there was racial unrest. People were protesting and marching, so much of how there were marches and protests in the aftermath of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. But it was really different in the 60s. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention because that's going to inform some of the lessons that I give to you. Next slide, please. So high school. I went from being in Switzerland to going to school in Toronto, Canada. I went to an all-girls school, it was a Scottish school. We had prayers every morning, which was a great thing. We wore kilts, we wore blazers, they were green blazers and green socks and Oxfords, as in black flat shoes. In today's jargon, I think I look like a hot mess because we couldn't wear makeup. And you have to think about it, in high school, all the other girls in other schools were wearing makeup and jewelry. We couldn't wear makeup, we couldn't wear jewelry, we could wear post earrings, and that was it. It was a pretty conservative school, but it was a great experience. It's the first time I had been in a single sex institution. And what I liked about Branksome Hall was that that's when I first got the sense, other than what my parents always instilled in me, of the sky is the limit. People criticize single sex institutions because they're like, who wants to be in a girls' school or a women's college? A lot of people don't like that. But for me, it was the first time that I felt that I was being pushed and that there were no glass ceilings. That literally we felt like we could accomplish anything as young girls. It was a very intense academic environment. I was the first head girl. If for any of you who are from Canada or lived in Canada or are familiar with the British system, the prefects are the people who, like president of the school, they call them prefects in some of the private schools. And I was head girl, the first African-American head girl that they ever had. And so I was breaking through glass ceilings, both, culturally, as well as just the dynamics of the institution. And I learned so many lessons at Branksome Hall, really about being a young girl and I was in boarding school as well there. It was just a great environment, and it was a testament to how you can work together in an international community. This is closer to the US than I was at boarding school in Switzerland, but you can work in an international community to bring about change and difference. And you can accelerate despite the odds. There were certainly people, this was in the 70s, that had racial animus towards me because I was African-American. There were people who didn't like Americans, believe it, in Canada, even though they're one of our closest allies and we're so close. And so learning to navigate in that environment, there were only 4 African-American students from junior kindergarten to grade 13, 4. I was one of 4, and one of the 4 was my sister. So being in that kind of environment again, and there were more African-Americans or people of African descent in school in Switzerland than in Canada, but it was still a great experience that I learned a lot from. And that informed some of my decisions, because it was while I was in Canada and I accelerated a year, so I skipped a grade, but I did go to grade 13, that I started thinking about a career in law. And I think if I'm not mistaken, in 10th grade, I worked at a law firm. I always had a whole bunch of summer internships and jobs. I had to work for my mom. That was a requirement. We had to work for our mother. And then I also worked, I was a candy striper at a hospital. And then I worked at a law firm. So next slide. Then I went to college. This is in the 80s, Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts, a women's Ivy League school. There were a lot of political realities in the 80s. There were social dynamics being at a women's college. This was different than being in an all-girls school. And I did internships at law firms. I also, my junior year, went abroad. I went back to Geneva, University of Geneva. I prepared for my honors thesis, which I ultimately wrote in French. And I did a comparative analysis of the Negritude movement and the Harlem Renaissance. So the Negritude movement was a movement where scholars and literary people there was an awakening in Paris and other places where there was an African diaspora, and it was sort of similar to the Harlem Renaissance. What was important about that experience for me, and when I look back as a lawyer, was, again, it was being the freedom of thought, being able to think, being able to be in an international community which at that point was a comfort zone for me. And it positioned me for law school, of course, because I had to apply to law school, and I knew that I wanted to go to Georgetown because I wanted to go to a school that had a strong international program. And at that point, I spoke French fluently, and at that point, I also spoke Spanish fluently. My Spanish is a little more rusty now. And I knew that as a practitioner, whatever I did, because I thought I'm going to go to law school, and I thought initially I might want to work at the UN. And so for those of you in law school, it's not so unusual to think of different career paths, no matter what stage in your development you're at. Next slide, please. So then I went to law school, Georgetown University Law Center. Georgetown probably has a very similar structure to you all, because it is a Jesuit school. And that was really a great experience too on some levels, but law school was very difficult. I don't want to be discouraging to you. I want to be encouraging, but I have to be honest. Law school, some people just sailed through law school like it was no tomorrow, and they loved it. I loved parts of law school, but I have to be honest, I cannot say that I really love the Socratic method. I really can't say that. I didn't, at Georgetown, our classes, we had about 125 students per class. We had one exam at the end of the year. Everything rode on that one exam at the end of the year. The only exception was for criminal law and criminal procedure. But I think it's different now, but I really cemented my international focus. I didn't know if I wanted to practice law. I didn't want to do litigation. And all my professors said, you need to do litigation. You're great, because we had I'm sure y'all have the trial, the little seminars that you do in trial masters or trial advocacy. It was called trial advocacy. And the professor said, you should go into trial work. I said, no, I should go into international work. I want to be a diplomat. They said, no, that's true, but you should go into trial work. You have the skills. I was like, no, because I envisioned trial work was writing briefs and and I just thought that would be a fate worse than death. I loved advocacy, but I thought that it was, that I'd be in a library the whole time. I didn't really understand what that meant, but I kept on saying, no, international is where I need to go. My language skills, all this. I aggressively pursued a summer internship. After my first month in law school, I went to, in DC, we have the Congressional Black Caucus. I went to the Congressional Black Caucus with my parents. That's how young I was, with my parents. And met a managing partner at a law firm. He gave me his business card with his wife. They knew my parents. And he said, we don't hire first years out of law school. Remember, I had just started law school a month before. We don't hire years out of law school because, you basically don't have any skills. But, we hire 22 students for our law clerk, our summer associate program. But if somebody doesn't come or something like that, or they don't accept our offer, which is unlikely, this is literally said it's unlikely. I mean, sometimes we might make an offer to a first year. And he gave me his card. He gave me his phone number. He said, this is my wife, and you can call on the weekends. And ladies and gentlemen, I called him every single day, Monday through Friday at the office and on the weekends, because he gave me his card. That's how pushy I was, or let me say assertive, or even aggressive, because I wanted to work for the summer. And at law school, the focus was not on first-year law students. It was on second-year law students, securing jobs for them. And this is the 80s, we're talking about 1984. Finally, after 2.5 months, it was so bad. And there was you got to remember, no internet, Wi-Fi, all of that. None of that existed. None of it. You had fax, you had telex, and you had phones. And when the first cell phones came out, they were so heavy. Dean Lawson, I know you might remember this. And I don't know if your president remembers this too, but the cell phones were so heavy that you would almost hurt your arm carrying them. And by the way, when you got on the cell phones, you could hear everybody else's conversations. No interference. It was just a mess, but that was the beginning of technology. My last year of law school, LexisNexis came out. And you know what we said? This will never work, because we were used to doing, research manually. I don't know if y'all still do that in law school, but we did, we had to go with books and we shepherdized with the pocket parks. That's what we did. And when this system, LexisNexis, came out, where they were digitizing this, we said, we know this will never work. How could it work? How could they possibly? We just didn't, in the 80s, we didn't even know what we didn't know. And that's a true story. When we tried LexisNexis in the beginning, you had to memorize like 15 different symbols to get the research. But now it's one of the greatest research tools around. But anyway, I was very aggressive. I got the summer associate position. and I continued to clerk at that law school, at that firm throughout law school. And then over the summer, I worked at the World Bank for a summer, because remember, I thought I wanted to pursue an international career in their legal department. And then that's when I realized, I don't think this is really what I want to do. I think I do perhaps maybe want to practice law. I just want to be in an international space. So I worked at this firm. It was a big law firm, and got an offer. And when I graduated, I took a month off I graduated, I took the bar immediately, like almost everyone. And that is another experience that you must say prayers about. Just pray that you get through that process, which you will, and you're going to do fine, but you do have to pray, and you have to be very organized. I did that, got my first, that job, and then I took the Pennsylvania bar, passed it, waived into DC, which is something you all may want to think about. You can waive into the District of Columbia. And I think if you get 133 on the, I think it's still the same on the multi-state, you automatically can waive in once you apply. So consider, it's always good to have multiple bars, because you just never know when you'll need that extra degree, that extra license. But anyway, I did that. And then I was off to the races and working. Next slide, please. So this is where I think I can be most helpful for you all. I talked about being tenacious and getting that job. And maybe they thought I was harassing them. I don't know. I was just, if you give me your card and say, call me, then I'm going to call you. So when people make an offer to you to call them, call them. If they make an offer to you to mentor you, allow them to mentor you. You have to deal with busy people's schedules, but be tenacious, because you never know where it'll lead. So Finley Cumble, that was right out of law school, big law in DC. And Finley Cumble, in the history of jurisprudence, is responsible for the biggest breakup of law firms in the history of jurisprudence. Meaning, in the history of all law firms that fell apart, came back together and everything, Finley Cumble was probably the biggest, the largest, and the worst. Why? Because it was the biggest law firm in the 80s in this country. And when it fell apart, it fell apart. And so I had to experience early on, you imagine your first year law school, you worked at this firm throughout the summer, it's a great firm. It's a bipartisan firm, it's political, you're in DC, you're doing international work, it's wonderful, and the firm falls apart. And you're sitting here like, what? And that was my experience. Great experience in retrospect, but at the time I was sweating bullets. So I stayed with the successor firms and for about 12 years, and then I opened up my own practice. I got married in the process, and my husband lived in Norfolk, so I commuted between Norfolk and DC. I opened up my own practice briefly, and that firm became an affiliated firm of Willie Gary's office in Florida. I know Willie Gary most of my life because I lived in Florida, in Tampa, Florida. Our families knew each other. And when I had at Finley Cumble and the successor firms, I did strictly international work where I represented foreign governments, foreign interests, and I used my language skills. But I was traveling once a month, and I'm not complaining. It was a great experience. Overseas, literally once or twice a month, sometimes staying for 2 or 3 weeks. That's really great and sexy in the beginning. 10, 12 years later, you're just tired. That's just the bottom line. You're tired. And when I was ready for a change, Willie Gary talked to me, talked to my family, and basically said, look, when you're ready to go on your own, I never thought of going on my own. He said, you can partner with our firm. You and your husband come down to Florida and we'll show you how to do it. It took me about 5 seconds to make that decision, and off we went to Florida. I ultimately was in Florida. It was a powerhouse firm there. I ran the commercial and international litigation department. My goodness, saw all these hundreds of $1 million verdicts, settlements. And that's where I cut my teeth as a trial lawyer. I'm going back to law school when my professor said, you need to be a trial lawyer. And I was like, no. And here I was 12 years into my practice being just that. I'll never forget one of the first times after I decided to join Mr. Gary's office, he said, well, you've got all these skills, you've had a lot of great experience, but what do you want to do? I mean, what do you really, because you've done international work. And I said, well, I want to practice law. And he said, well, do you know how to file a lawsuit? And I almost want to say, well, what happened was see what kind of, I said, I've never filed a lawsuit. So just imagine this. I was 12 years into my practice. I had done all this really sexy, global, wonderful international work, traveling the world, never knew how to file a lawsuit. Other than what we did in our trial advocacy classes, when they showed us about pleading a complaint and then the answer, didn't know how to do that. So that was a complete transformation. But one of the great things about working at the big firm that I worked at in 1987, in 1988, again, before you all were born, I began working with Reverend Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson ran for president in 1984 and 1988. For those of you who hear about the history, there was a mantra, run, Jesse, run, Jesse, run. And in 1988, the Gabonese Republic, which was a country that we represented, and one of my clients wanted, president at the time, El Haj Omar Bongo, wanted to have Reverend Jackson to come to Gabon, to Libreville, to speak. And because it was one of our clients, we organized it, we arranged it, and it was one of my cases. So I coordinated his trip with his team, the legal aspects of his trip, all the things, the diplomatic issues and things he was going to address. And that was the first time I worked. I had met Reverend Jesse Jackson, but it was the first time I worked with him and worked with his team. And that was in 1988. When we landed in Libreville, they had translators for him. And I don't know if you all remember Jesse and Reverend Jackson, if you've heard him speak when he's preaching. And he's still, he's slowed down a little bit because it's public, he does have Parkinson's, but he still is out there fighting the fight of social justice. And I'm going to come back to this for you all. And in 1988, he had just run for president of the United States. And so when we landed in Libreville, there's always a press conference because Reverend Jackson is coming to Gabon. And they had translators, and he speaks in, he's probably one of the most compelling speakers I've heard, but he speaks also, he's a minister. So sometimes he speaks in religious tones and in riddles, and comparisons and all of these things. And he's a Baptist preacher. So it became readily apparent after 10 seconds of him delivering, giving his remarks at the airport as we got off the plane, that there was absolutely no comprehension of what he was saying. Not, because when you're trained at translation, you're trained, basically you translate into your native tongue, but it's more, there's really not, when you're trained in a classical sense, and this is something in the 80s, you're not trained to translate for a Baptist preacher, much less the Reverend Jesse Jackson. So I immediately stepped in, even though I was a lawyer, and I translated for him. I'm talking about after 10 seconds, because in my mind, I was like, oh, no. We're not going down in the international press in this way, where his message is being distorted. So I stepped in, became his translator for the whole trip, and then I was helping him with speeches. And that was not what I envisioned my role to be, right? I was a lawyer helping to negotiate all that. And so the moral to that story is you never know when you are called to work for great leaders. But when the calling comes, you must take the challenge, because that one assignment, that trip turned into a 32-year history. So almost my entire professional career, I've represented Reverend Jesse Jackson, Rainbow Push Coalition, his organizations, his family. It has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career. I've been on the front lines as a lawyer of almost every civil rights, international human rights issue that's come up. I've loved it. And that was for me, the balance to me always working in the private sector, that I was giving back to the civil rights movement. Because by the way, I've done that for almost 33 years on a pro bono basis. So, and all of these journeys, when I opened my own firm, when I worked for Willie Gary, I continued to work with Reverend Jackson. Of course, Willie Gary works with Reverend Jackson. So, in the circles, when you're in a circle of trial lawyers who are in this country making a difference, they all interface with, if you're African-American, certainly the civil rights leaders, the social justice engineers. I left Florida in about 2011 and moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where I am now, or 2012, Atlanta, Georgia, where I am now, practice in a smaller firm, a boutique firm doing med mal primarily, but also some of the civil rights work that I did. And then about 3 years ago, decided there was no time like the present. After 25 years of working, or 28 years really, or 29 years of working with a firm and not being the one to call the shots, I decided to really go on my own. And that's what I did. So I'm CEO of my own firm. So next slide. So that's the journey. So let's talk about social justice for a moment. We're celebrating Black History Month. What does that mean? We're celebrating our leaders, the extraordinary people that have shaped this country. You heard from Ben Crump. I love talking about Ben Crump. I love talking about Lonita Baker. I love talking about Darrell Parks, Lee Merritt, Chris Stewart. Why? Because they are social justice engineers. Each one of those lawyers chose, in addition to many of them do, personal injury work, commercial work, they have different areas of practice, but they chose also to do civil rights work, to step up to the plate. And it's not always easy, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you, and represent the families of the least of these, people who had no voice. There've been shootings and killings of African Americans and Black and brown people forever, for as long as I can have been born, and even before then. We know the history and what has happened. It's tragic. Your president talked about Tulsa, Oklahoma. For those of you, y'all are too young to know about this song. You Dropped a Bomb on Me. There's a song by the Gap Band. I don't even know if they play together anymore, but the Gap Band, You Dropped the Bomb on Me. That was about the crisis in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which went undocumented for years, not in the newspapers. There was a Black Wall Street in this incredible city that was destroyed, and it was not in any history book for the longest time. So these social justice engineers coming front center, Ben Crump, who spoke to you all last year, and all the others, Lonita Baker, who's a vice president of the NBA, who is one of the few women that you see in these high-profile civil rights cases, they're all National Bar Association members. I know this is a shameless plug, but Dean Lawson, I have to. And they're all National Bar members. They came up through the National Bar. They were trained at the National Bar with the National Bar. You've got one of the greatest minds on criminal justice and civil rights reform at your school. That's Dean Lawson. Oh my goodness. You look at her writings, look at her teachings, look at the social justice that she's done, cybersecurity, her areas of focus. I know because she's one of our leaders at the NBA. So all of these people that you see doing these high profile cases, Chris Stewart is a past president of affiliate chapter of the NBA. He got $1 billion with a B verdict on one case, a rape case. A single case of a woman who was raped. These are phenomenal trial lawyers who are also doing social justice. I raise this not because I'm just president of the National Bar. I'm the chair of the board of Rainbow Push Coalition. See, it all comes full circle. I started off one assignment with Reverend Jackson. Now I'm chair of the board and the first woman to ever serve in that capacity. I've been on boards of so many nonprofit organizations, including child advocacy groups, media groups, university groups, and others, because you must give back. It doesn't matter if you're a corporate or commercial lawyer, you must give back. Volunteer your time. No matter what area of law you choose, you must be a social justice engineer. Let me just tell you something, whether you want to or not, if you're a member of BALSA, if you're African American, if you're a person of color, Black and brown, your communities are going to expect it. They're going to call on you. They're going to ask you questions, voting rights, civil rights. It doesn't matter if you practice in those areas, because you, by being a member of the bar, are going to be held to a high standard in your community, whether you choose to serve them or not. You're going to be called on to do it. So you must embrace it. You must embrace it. I traveled the world doing all this stuff, but I embraced working with Reverend Jackson because I knew that in addition to all the corporate commercial representing all these governments, whatever that I did, at the core and foundation of who I am, that I could not ignore, and I needed to be a part of civil rights, of human rights, of injustices, to do my little part as an individual in making things better. Because let me tell you, when you are a victim of police brutality, no one cares that you have a law degree. My children who are 16 and 18, two boys, about 4 months ago, where they go to prep school here in the Atlanta area, they were, during COVID, they both play football, going to football practice. And they were stopped by the police for no reason. They were driving my vehicle. I wish they had been driving, in retrospect, their vehicle, which is like a low-level high school vehicle. It's safe, but it's no frills or anything, because I want them to learn that they have no job. So they're not going to get, a luxury vehicle. They have to earn it. But they were driving my luxury vehicle and they got stopped by the police. And I can tell you right now, as we sit here, probably 3 of the worst minutes of my life. I don't care what's ever happened to me in life. Those were 3 of the worst minutes of my life when I got the text originally from my younger son, who's 16, saying, "Mommy, we're stopped by the police." And my older son, "Mommy, we're stopped by the police. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay." That's what my children were saying to me via text. So when you have that experience, you must never forget that you've got to fight for social justice, no matter where you are, no matter what you do. So for you law students, the good news is you're poised to do it. You're at a magnificent law school. You have magnificent mentors. You have magnificent training that will position you to be the best and the brightest. You might pursue a career in government. We've got an administration now. A lot of people want to work in government. You might pursue a career in commercial law. You might pursue a career in academics. You might pursue a personal injury career. You might be making goo gobs of money, but please don't forget that you must think about social justice, because it could be you. It could be your kids. My kids were okay. The end of the story, I just got a little choked up, so I had to pivot, which is what you learn how to do when you're a lawyer. They were okay. There was no incident. They survived it. I almost didn't survive it because, as I said, it was 3. I didn't know if 3 very difficult minutes for me until they said, "Mommy, we're okay. We're on our way to school." And I just sat and prayed, because that is all that I could do. I thanked God. I thank God at that moment for sparing my children, because we are in the town where so much happens to Black and brown people. Next slide, please. So the takeaways and keys to success: you must work hard. There will never be a free pass. You've got to work hard. If anyone tells you that the journey to being a lawyer is easy, please do not trust with another word that they say, because it's not easy. And that person is leading you down a path that's not realistic. It's going to be tough in a great way, but you have to work hard, much like you're working hard in law school. You've got to be the best prepared person in the room. Now, I'm a trial lawyer. Of course, I don't like to lose anything. I don't even like to say the word lose, but the reality is, you try a case, you're going to lose a case. In fact, you learn more from the cases that you lose. But if you are going to be a trial lawyer, or any kind of lawyer where you're doing advocacy, you should be the best prepared person as relates to your case or your client's interests. There should not be anyone else that knows the facts of your case better than you. Not a judge, not your opposing counsel, maybe your client, but your client doesn't have the legal training. But you must be the best prepared person in the room, because that's the expectation if you're going to be a lawyer. You've got to be willing to pursue excellence for yourself and your clients. The name of the game is excellence, being the best that you can be. As we celebrate Black History Month, we're celebrating excellence. We're celebrating those who sacrificed themselves, stood on the front line, so that you actually could be in the law school that you're in, so that I could go to Georgetown, so that I could go to Smith College, so I could go to University of Geneva, so that I could sit here in front of you and be president of the MBA. People sacrifice for us to get there. So you don't have the right not to achieve excellence and try your best to get there. You've got to learn to juggle. I actually know how to juggle 3 balls. That's about as much as I can do. But when you're a lawyer, you get married, you have children, you get divorced, you have a business, you are juggling every single day of your life. Case in point, I had my inaugural radio show today. I was sharing this with Dean Lawson and with Jorge. My show was from 11 a.m. to 12 noon when this program started. I was not going to not do the show, and I was not going to be late for this program. I was determined, because it was just so important for me to have a moment of your time to speak to you all, because I love balsa. I love law students, and I wanted to impart any pearls of wisdom that I could. So I was determined. That's what we call a juggling act. I told the producers, you know what, we need to stop 1 or 2 minutes before. And there were like tons of questions, because it was my first show. I said, we need to stop a minute or two before, because I've got to log in and be on time, because I'm talking to Black law students. I'm talking to African-American law students. I'm talking to a university, and I want to make sure that I am there to deliver the message. Well, because we're in a virtual platform in COVID, that's possible, but you got to juggle. And whenever I do something where I know that I've got to back, because I'm working, this is my home office, although I do occasionally go to my office, which is 5 minutes away. My children are doing virtual learning. I tell my kids, because, when you're working from home, they eat 7 to 8 meals a day at a minimum, maybe more. And I told them, mommy is not going to cook 7 to 8 meals a day. You all are 16 and 18, you can cook. I might cook one or maybe a half a meal, but you all are going to cook the rest. So now they know how to cook, because you can't do it all. You're just juggling. Mommy, where's you know where the sugar is? You have to have these discussions. So you've got to learn to juggle. I say that to men and to women, to the young women out there. The rules aren't the same for men and women. Recognize that right now. Right now, recognize the rules of engagement as a lawyer are not going to be the same, just as they're not the same now. I could have a whole seminar on that. As we go and celebrate International Women's Month, you've got to, I'm sure there'll be programs about that, but you need to recognize that the rules of engagement are not the same. We've made strides, but they're not the same. You've got to I think I said earlier, don't let people define you. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't be the best that you can be. You know you can. You must be the best that you can be. Don't be the best that someone else can be. That's not the barometer. It's the best that you can be. And don't let other people define you in any way. And I know with this age of social media, and while we're talking about social media, take down any craziness on your social media. The first thing I do when I interview lawyers, law students, or anyone is I look at their social media. And if there's something that remotely makes me believe their judgment is at issue, many of us, that will be a question mark. Just take it down. We understand, maybe you didn't know, you all in this generation, everything is social media. You don't need to have your whole life on social media. When you are going to become officers of the court, that degree, when you graduate, means something. That law license means something. That means that you're leaders in the community. We don't need to see you in bikinis showing off how cute, great you look for the women, or in Speedo, whatever those, look that for the men. We don't need to see all of that when you're lawyers. And as law students, believe it or not, you must remember that people are looking at that when you're applying for jobs. So clean up your social media. Don't air your dirty laundry on social media, because again, people will look at that. You must be sensitive to gender and racial inequities. I use the example of what happened to me when I was 6 because it stuck with me. I know what it is to be what I call the other. I felt what it is to be the other. And I dare say most of you probably know what that is too. But just take that, embrace it, and keep it moving. Don't use excuses. We just keep it moving. When you fall down, you wipe off your knees and you get back up. And by the way, put some lotion on your knees if they are ashy. That's a little personal joke that I have, because so many times I see when, when you fall down, you get ash on your knees. Put lotion, get back up, put lotion on your knees, and keep it moving. And recognize there's always a tomorrow. Tough times don't last, tough people do. Never compromise your integrity. Never compromise your integrity. Your law license is a license of integrity. That's what it is. Don't compromise it. Don't take it lightly. That's what it is to be a lawyer. That's what it is to be successful. It's not how much money you make. It's not all the cases that you've won. It's the integrity. If you have a grandmother who's alive, you need to look at her in the mirror, or someone who's really important to you. I say a grandmother because most people love their grandmothers or their grandfathers. Someone who's important to you has been a moral barometer for you. It might be an auntie, an uncle, a godmother, your mother. You need to be able to look at that person in the eye and say, mommy or grandmother, or whatever you call her, granny, or my dear, I've done nothing wrong. As a lawyer, I've not stepped over the line. As a lawyer, I've operated with integrity as a lawyer. Remember that, because there are going to come times when you're going to be challenged. Trust me. I've been at this 34 years. I've been challenged more than a little. And as a trial lawyer, I've been called every kind of I don't know what. And what I tell people is just make sure you pronounce my name correctly and spell it correctly. And the reason why I take that approach is because I'm going to cross every T and dot every I, because there's so much. I ride and stand on the shoulders of so many. Thurgood Marshall, Constance Baker Motley, Charles Hamilton Houston, Willie Gary, Johnny Cochran, Ben Crump. We all stand on shoulders of giants in the industry. And if you talk to them, each one of them will tell you about their journey that hasn't been easy, men or women. So I challenge you all in closing to be the best that you can be. I challenge you all in closing to be social justice engineers by choice versus being forced on you. And I challenge you all to be leaders in your community. And when we talk about voter suppression, police brutality, and COVID-19, the 3 pandemics that I focused on in my bar year, I challenge you all to do something good for someone. Help someone through COVID, talk to them, help someone deal with police brutality, help someone deal with voter suppression, and know that that license that you have is a license to freedom. So use it. Thank you.
Thank you, President Hoffler. And I believe the students have some directed questions if you want to follow up. I'll pass the floor to our president of BALSA and BALSA members.
Thank you.
Hey, how you doing, President Hoffler? Thank you so much for just giving us an amazing story to your background and how you got to the position that you're in today. Definitely, it hit home when you were talking about with your sons and being pulled over. That's something as myself as a Black man in America that I fear every day. And I've been in those situations before, so it definitely hit home when you were talking to us about that. So thank you for being able to just open up with us and give us a different perspective, a different side of you. So I think we're all touched by that, for sure. So I'm here with Jamie Noisley, and she's our SBA president here at the university, and one of my dearest and closest friends. And we're going to tag team today, and then we're going to ask you a few questions that we were able to solicit from some of the other members, and we tried to find maybe 4 or 5 of the 4 or 5 questions that most closely reflected some of the themes that we knew that you were going to be talking about today. So of course they're open-ended questions, so feel free to just use them as a guideline, but don't be afraid to, if you need to veer off the railing a little bit, it's fine. So we definitely want to hear everything that you would have to say. So I think Jamie will be asking you the first question. So go ahead, Jamie.
Yes, thank you so much for just being here today and for everything that you shared with us. You exude power and confidence. And I just know so many friends I have right now who are probably watching this and just like snapping their fingers because, you went off. But anyway, we just have a few questions. I don't think we'll get through all of them, but we'll kind of just play it and see how we go. So the first question we had was, you have been a member of the NBA since you were a law student at Georgetown University. So what role did early membership in the NBA play in your climb to success?
Well, thank you for that question. First of all, to Jamie and to McDaniel, thank you. Thank you so much for your kind comments. I'm going to try and answer every question. So I'm going to speak quickly if I can, and then I'm going to allow you all to email me if you need to, because I want to be able, I'm here to answer every single question. I want to be helpful where I can be. So being a member of the MBA in law school really changed the way that I looked at the practice of law. I met with the executive director. We had an office in DC in 1984 or 85, either early 85 or 84. And I was, John Crump, the then executive director, was so dynamic that I left there thinking there's only one bar association, it's National Bar Association. And then you've got all these other little associations that you can join if you want to. I thought it was a mandatory bar. I was so impressed with the breadth and the the richness of the members that I met. The dean of my law school at the time was Dave Wilmot, much like Dean Lawson. And so you look up to your dean, and Dave Wilmot was like, of course y'all are going to join the NBA. I mean, it was not even, will you, can you? Of course you're going to join the NBA. So how did that, my jobs, the job opportunities that I've had, I believe every single person was an NBA member that either connected me to the job, that interviewed me, made a phone call. And that was critically important. So how did it shape what role did it play? It played a role in me getting a job, networking, just talking to NBA members. And what I've done this year, you all may know this, is now every member of BALSA, and we're instituting this, in the country is automatically going to be a member for free of the National Bar Association while they're students, which will mean they will be able to avail themselves of the mentorship, the programs, and all that we have to offer. That was kind of what I got in a different way when I was in law school, but it wasn't as structured as what we're doing now, where I am negotiating internships for law students, for African-American law students. So take an example. If LexisNexis, who's one of our global partners, calls and said, look, we want to have 5 interns, and we want to have diverse interns. Can you put us in touch with, we will be able to do that very quickly and get the information out to what will be all of our BALSA chapters. So I say that because that the NBA played a critical role for me in my journey to success through and through. Willie, Gary, everyone that I worked with, many of the African-Americans, almost all the African-Americans I worked with over the years, whether I was at a predominantly majority firm or not, were National Bar Association members. They also were members of the American Bar Association, maybe local bars, but the National Bar was something that they always said. It's a place when you are confronting things as lawyers and the mentoring, there's just so much, it's so rich in experience. And I've definitely benefited from that. And I owe a debt of gratitude to the NBA for my success now, quite frankly.
Tagging me in, Jamie. All right. All right. So I'll be asking the second question here. You spoke about it briefly about how the rules are different for Black women attorneys in the legal field. And so this question kind of veers towards that. So did your identity as a Black woman ever cause you to think you weren't qualified for a position you really wanted, or otherwise cause you to doubt your abilities? If so, how were you able to overcome your self-doubt and build such a prestigious name for yourself?
That's an excellent question. Without a doubt, I have been questioned on so many levels, I felt, because I was a Black woman. There were many times, even in law school, and even in college, quite frankly, many times I've had a client say to me over the phone, he didn't realize I was a Black person at the time. He first said to me, this was in the 80s, he didn't believe in women lawyers. He thought that women should not be lawyers. He had been a trial lawyer, and I was settling a case for him in the Caribbean, in Antigua and Barbuda. This is in 1988, and I called because, man, we didn't have email, fact, we didn't have all that, and talked to him, and he said to me, he didn't know why I was assigned to the case. That was just preposterous, and he was going to talk to the senior partners because he just didn't believe that women should be lawyers. So that was within the first 6 months of me practicing as a full-time lawyer. And I was going to go to Antigua to help settle his claims along with my senior partner. And when he was saying that, I thought to myself, well, just wait till you see me. Because he said he didn't think women should be lawyers, but he had no idea I was Black. And when he saw me, he almost had a hissy fit beyond what I can even describe. That's a story for another day because it's hilarious. But yes, I've had to overcome that. You do have to overcome that. People will doubt you. I have to be honest with you. Sometimes the doubt that I receive, or the trepidation, or the nasty remarks, or the discriminatory conduct, that's what I might call it sometimes. It's hard to distinguish if it's because of gender or because of race. Usually it's both, but there's some people who just don't want to deal with women. Just like my client. He just was like, well, I couldn't see him, but what he conveyed over the phone was, this is a disgrace. I'm going to go complain to the senior partners. And he did complain, and they told him, this is who's working on your case. because frankly, he was so disagreeable, nobody wanted to work on his case, but I was a new associate, so, you know, stuff goes downhill. I was delighted to go to Antigua and Barbuda for 3 weeks. But I really couldn't figure out until I met the client on the phone why no other associate wanted to work on the case, because they're like, oh no, everybody was too busy. And I was like, you got to go to Antigua and Barbuda for 3 weeks? So I learned a lot because I had to operate when I was actually there through a lot of adversity. He challenged me at once he saw me, he questioned every part of my resume. He thought I made up, because I had to send him my resume. He thought I made up everything in my resume. He didn't believe I was the person who he'd been talking to. And because eventually he warmed up after 3 months talking to him on the phone, he warmed up to the notion that a woman could maybe handle his case. And I wasn't there were senior partners working with me. So yes, you're going to have to overcome that. Yes, the rules are different. Yes, I've been questioned and challenged many times in my career, get questioned now. But that's when you have to look inside yourself and not allow anyone to define you. And you have to have lifelines. You know, I have lifelines, people who over time have been mentors, who have helped pick me up when I felt doubt, help refocus, allow me to pivot. I always say, never let anyone see you sweat. You know, just because people make you feel some kind of way, don't let them know that they've won, because it's wrong. It's wrong. You know you're qualified, you know you can do it, and you must do it. But if you allow people to define you and to make you feel like you are less than you are, or you're not good enough, then that's what you will portray. So you got to believe in yourself. And even if you don't at that moment, just get yourself together, go to the ladies' room, do whatever you need to do for the ladies to get yourself together. And then go back out and shine. When you get home, cry, whatever you do, call, you know, express your frustrations, but don't let people see you do that, because then that will be perceived as a weakness. But understand it's going to happen regularly. And even when you have, quote unquote, achieved quite a bit as a trial lawyer, it still will happen, because people are still going to challenge you if they don't believe that you should be where you are.
That was an amazing response. Thank you for that. So our third question, as young attorneys in the making, we are constantly reminded about the importance of professionalism in the legal field. As young attorneys of color in the making, however, we are also constantly reminded that racism runs deep in professionalism culture. For example, Black men and women have been fired just for coming to work with their natural hair. Arab people have been fired for speaking Arabic to their colleagues, and Latinos have been fired for violating professional conduct codes when their white co-workers were not fired for doing the same thing. As we prepare to enter the legal field, how do you suggest we reconcile this dichotomy?
That's the question of the century. I have a lot to say about that, having lived that. And one of my areas of practice is employment discrimination. So what I would say is this: you have to live into your own authentic self, number one. So in order for you to be the best that you can be, you have to be confident in what you are, right? And we know, for instance, as Black women, we might have different types of hairstyles. If you look at me, you're probably the picture, right? The picture of me on the little, on the advertising look different, because now we're in COVID, so my hair is different. And we have different textures. We might go natural. All of that is permissible under the law. There was a case in the 80s where an African-American woman was fired, I think by Marriott, because she wore braids to work. And that was a seminal case. It's not permissible. That's a violation of the law, but of course people do it. And there's unconscious bias all the time. And so what I tell young students is I try to practice what I preach. When you determine what you want to do, if you're going to be a corporate lawyer in a very conservative firm, you need to know the rules of engagement. That doesn't mean that you can't have natural hair. No, that's not what that means. That means if you have braids, they need to be pulled back in a conservative bun, because at that firm, it's conservative. You can't wear a mini skirt without stockings in a firm when the culture is more conservative. You don't make up the rules, but certainly things that you cannot change, like who you are, who you look like, and your hair texture, are things that you don't change. But you should not have, like, some people have different color hair, you know, like I'm talking about purple and yellow and green and stuff, because that's in vogue for some people. You can't possibly think that someone's going to hire you in a conservative firm if you have purple hair. That could happen, but it's not likely. You shouldn't feel as a trial lawyer when you go into a courtroom that you can just, sort of dress any kind of way. There are rules of engagement that you must observe, but that should not take away your cultural identity. You cannot do anything about the color of your skin. You embrace it, it's beautiful. You can't do anything about the hips and the curves. You embrace it, it's wonderful. There's nothing you can do to change that, nor should you try. But that should not take away from what you have to offer. So, and the answer is sometimes when you look at where you're going to work, if you're in a conservative culture, you have to conform. Everyone has to conform to a degree, but that doesn't mean get rid of your cultural orientation. That just means if you have a natural hairstyle, make sure that it's neater, or you can pull it back sometimes, or you can do things, because you have to remember when you're servicing clients or when you're going before a judge, or there are certain things that you have to observe that might be protocols, but you also want to be able to express yourself in the best version of yourself. And if you look like something that's not you, you're not going to express yourself in the best version. People can tell when you're uncomfortable. I tell trial lawyers all the time, women, do not wear a new pair of shoes when you're trying the case and you're going to be on your feet, because your feet will hurt. Your feet are going to hurt. If your feet hurt, you're going to be moving and grooving and everything because your feet are hurting. And the jury's going to wonder, why is she hopping from, side to side? Is this a dance or something? Your feet are hurting. And when you're on your feet all morning, you start your trial at 9 and you end at 5 or 6, your feet will be hurting. You must have shoes that you're comfortable in. So that's a small example that illustrates my point that sometimes courtroom presence is different than what your presence, you can be more casual these days in an office, but when you go to court, you're persuading a jury, you've got to be comfortable in your skin. There's an expression in French, but in English, it's being comfortable in your skin. And that literally means if you're African-American, of color, or Black and brown, in your skin, not in someone else's skin. So you've got to be, but you also have to observe. There are women who would be role models for you if you're a woman of courtroom protocol in terms of your dress and in terms of your hair. It doesn't mean that you change your hairstyle. It might just mean that you may want to, if you're in like I've tried cases in conservative places where they maybe never seen any Black women lawyers. And so, that's not going to be the time for me to look like Shaka Zulu. Do you know what I'm saying? You have to recognize that where you are and what's required, but it doesn't mean that you give up your identity. It's wrong to fire someone because of those things. That is against the law, and that's why there's a lot of litigation. So as officers of the court, you must conduct yourself where you are in your best version of yourself. That's a beauty of this world, of this country, that we can look and be who we are and still get the job done. So I embrace you being your own authentic self. But when it comes to courtroom attire for women, don't wear mini skirts, things that are too tight, you can't breathe, heels that are too high. Those are not things that I believe are appropriate courtroom attire. I don't know if I'm making the distinctions clear enough. For men, I do know a couple lawyers that can get away with zoot suits because they have earned their wings and are billionaires and they've done it. But when you're going to court law, it's a time for you to be conservative looking. You don't want to have a zoot suit, perhaps. Even if everybody else is wearing a zoot suit, my recommendation is don't do that. Now, Afrocentric hairdos, that's fine. Just be neat. Be neat. And just think of your grandmother. If you're representing your grandmother, what is your grandmother going to say? Well, okay, let me tell you that, because my grandma would say, what in the world is you got on your head? So that's maybe not the best example, but think of someone who you respect, your dean. Your dean has a natural hairdo. She looks beautiful. Do you see what I'm saying? There are ways that you can carry a look and be your authentic self. Don't conform because somebody else is telling you. But if you decide to go to the most conservative firm in the world, understand that it's the most conservative firm in the world. And don't be surprised if all the women, it can't just be you, all the women are like, I remember in the 90s, the women in our firm had a knockdown, drag out discussion, early 90s, about wearing pantsuits. The male partners thought that was not professional and women should not wear pantsuits, period, in the discussion. Knockdown, drag out, early 90s, 91, 92. So now women wear pantsuits. So my point is, recognize your circumstances, Be culturally who you are. You have to be comfortable in your skin. What you have to do, success knows no color in many respects. If you are the person who can get the best result for clients, that's who the clients are going to go to. And your color and all that ceases to be relevant because they want the best lawyer, the most proficient person. Demonstrate your credentials and skills. Sometimes, when you have all these things that can distract, people will focus on the distractions and not you. But you can't change your color, your hair texture, and all of that. Just remember that, and don't try. I wouldn't recommend that.
Thank you for the response. Okay, so this is our fourth question here. So you briefly touched on these topics here. So you've charted a fight. You've charted a vision to fight 3 pandemics plaguing communities of Black and Brown people in America's justice system. So COVID-19 going on, police brutality, of course, as we've known, has been going on, and of course, even just with this past election, but election suppression. So how have you been using your position as president to realize this vision? And can you tell us a little bit more about the game plan? I know you talked about merging Balsa with NBA and whatnot, but do you have other ideas that you can briefly tell us about?
Absolutely. So the 3 pandemics, COVID-19, police brutality, and voter suppression or election protection are, to me, at the heart of what's plaguing our country as we speak. COVID-19, as we know, has disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities. So as lawyers, one of the things that we've done at the NBA, we have a task force, and we have moved into some of the worst impacted communities to try to educate our members, to try to give protective gear, especially during voting season, to provide computers through some of our partnerships with some of our sponsors and partners, computers to disadvantaged children. One thing that we know in disadvantaged communities is that if you don't have access to a computer and Wi-Fi, high speed, you're not going to learn virtually. I don't care how smart you are, because it's impossible to learn on a phone. You can't learn your lesson on a cell phone. Some of these kids don't have computers. How are they going to do virtual learning if they don't have access to Wi-Fi, high-speed internet? So one of the things, and it's just tragic, and it's disproportionately impacted Black and Brown communities. So I'm just focusing on education. We also have been part of, as leaders in your community, you're going to be called on to do this, to help educate people about COVID, about what COVID is, what it's not, and why is it disproportionately impacting our communities, and also on the vaccination. Because of the fact that historically, in the past, many African Americans have been guinea pigs. We know about the Tuskegee experiment. And one of our past presidents of the NBA, who's still alive, Fred Gray, who's 90, still practicing, going to work every day, was the lawyer for those who were the victims of the Tuskegee experiment. And there have been other times when African Americans have been guinea pigs. There's a lot of distrust when we see things like COVID, the vaccine. A lot of people have distrust over the vaccine, but particularly in our community, we see that. So a lot of our leaders are trying to help people have a better understanding so they can make an informed decision. We're not saying you must or you shouldn't, but an informed decision. I equate COVID or the vaccine to Swiss cheese. This is what an epidemiologist told me. She said, when you have Swiss cheese, a piece of Swiss cheese has a lot of holes in it. But if you have 6 pieces of Swiss cheese, you can fill up those holes, but there's no guarantee. So a mask and COVID, this is kind of what we do as lawyers. We try to educate people on masks, on social distancing, all of those things. The vaccination just helps to fill those holes, but it's not a guarantee because we don't have enough knowledge. So as lawyers sometimes, and as those who are looking to be, who are shortly going to become lawyers, people look to you for answers, look to you for guidance, because they know that you're able to process things better. And that's what we have tackled with COVID-19 throughout the country. Voter suppression, we just came off of a very contentious presidential election, and none of us can forget what happened on January 6th. And we also had a very contentious runoff election in Georgia, which is where I am. The National Bar Association played a critical role in both of those both the presidential and the Georgia Senate runoff election, where we had almost 7,000 lawyers with our partnerships, because we had a partnership with the Divine Nine, other organizations, ready for our election protection effort, which is a nonpartisan effort, protecting people's right to vote. Our position, you don't have to be a social justice engineer to take this position, but that everyone who's registered should have the right to vote, should be able to vote without suppression, without having a gun or feeling some kind of discomfort or having, the polling stations closed at the last minute, having acts of what we call voter suppression, severe voter suppression. There are about 90 different ways that voter suppression manifests itself. So at the National Bar, what we did is working with our community, other grassroots organizations, such as Fair Fight and others throughout the country, so that we could help people get to the polls, provide water to the polls, provide transportation, working with Lyft and Uber and organizations that provided free transportation to people in communities that nobody wanted to go into, allowing those because the polling stations in those communities were closed. So we felt as African-American lawyers, as leaders, we need to help facilitate that and work with grassroots organizations. And so we did that. It was a great effort, and it was just very impactful to team up with new partners like the Divine Nine. And then thirdly, police brutality. We talked about how many of our leaders at the NBA are heading some of these major cases, but it's not just those major cases that get publicity. Throughout the country, you see many NBA members who are spearheading these police brutality cases. There's a need for widespread change. Nobody wants to continue to see George Floyd's on TV. We don't want to see this. Enough is enough. That's why there have been protests. So the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, the NBA, working closely with the Congressional Black Caucus, supports that, has done a lot. We get calls routinely from members of Congress and others that want our input, whether it's this administration or other administrations. So I say that because our role as those who are on the front lines of litigating those cases, our role is critical to sensitizing lawmakers who are putting forth this legislation to the practical aspects. One of the things that was important with the settlement on the Breonna Taylor case that Ben Crump and Lanita Baker worked on, that there were programmatic initiatives, changes to the rules of engagement with the police in Kentucky, in that community. And Louisville, why was that important? Because you need change. These things are happening because of the way the rules were. So having the programmatic initiatives, the lawyers on the front lines know that firsthand. They can speak to that and have given testimony about that. So that's how the National Bar has played an important role in that. And going forward, even on a state level, ensuring that our states, it's not good enough to just have federal legislation. I feel very confident that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act in some form is going to be passed in this Congress. But on a state level, on a local level, I live here in Atlanta, Georgia. Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms has been very progressive in her vision on police reform. That doesn't mean defunding, it just means reform, making sure that we modernize and have new rules of engagement so that people aren't being killed on a regular basis. In places like Chicago, every weekend you're going to have 5, 6, 7, 10 killings at the hands of where there's excessive use of force. There's got to be a change on that. And that's why we see the protests and the work that's done. So that's why I selected those 3 buckets, but that doesn't mean that's all that we're doing. We have robust programs to help people who want to transition into the administration. We have over 80 affiliate chapters throughout the country, 28 sections and divisions and regions and affiliates, 12 regions as well. And so we are everywhere and doing what I think is the great work of social justice engineers at the NBA. So those are just the 3 areas that I focused on.
Thank you. Just kind of as a caveat to that question, do you have any insight into just how students can start to join the initiative with the NBA?
Just by emailing and saying, I want to join. My goodness, would we love to have more law students engaged. We do have law students engaged, but we want more. Why? Because you all have, for one, you all are so technologically savvy. And we are so not, meaning people in my generation, we are so not, I don't speak for Dean Lawson. She's very technologically savvy, but I can speak for myself, not technologically savvy. I'm much better because of my kids, but I can tell you fairly regularly, I'm calling my kids, quick, help me with this. And they help me. But we love to have law students because the energy that you bring, your analysis, your diligence, we want you integrated in this process. So if you want to be involved in any of those buckets or anything involving the MBA, that's an email, that's a phone call. You've got one of the Board of Governors. The Board of Governors is the governing entity, the leadership of the MBA as your dean. That's the first place where you get involved. And Dean Lawson, however we need to do it, we just had a meeting at 7 this morning with my team about how we need to engage more law students on an initiative that we have. So there's so many opportunities. We want to add value to your existence. That's what we want. We don't want you to feel like you're alone on an island when you confront some of these things. For one, we've been there, but secondly, the world is brutal today. It's brutal. We can help you to process some of these things. I kind of believe we're all in a state of PTSD in one form or another because of COVID. And I'm not using the clinical term correctly. I don't literally mean PTSD, but some form of it where we're coping with a deadly disease. And where not everybody at this point can be vaccinated. Not everybody wants to be vaccinated. We're getting conflicting signals. And we've had family members or friends or people that we know who have died. Many lawyers, officers of the court, and judges have died nationwide because of COVID, not because of natural ill, because of COVID. Many people in our family, we see it everywhere. And some people just, it just attacks, it's an equal opportunity, dangerous disease. So that has an impact on you all. You're doing, I imagine, for the most part, a lot of law schools are doing virtual learning, not being able to take bar exams or sit into rooms, delaying your admission to the bar. All of those things are very, very critical. We'd like to help you process that. As we process this as well, we want to be part of the solution.
Thank you. And actually, that's a great segue into our final question, which is about the bar. So you're licensed in 5 states, including Georgia, Florida, Virginia, Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania. Don't know how you did it, but congrats. Do you have any advice to offer the students getting ready to graduate and take the bar for the first time?
Yes. I will say that the bar exam for me was one of the most competitive exams that I've ever taken. But the competition is not your traditional competition. You all are going to, and please hear me on this, I just had to be a member of 5 different bars to finally get it. And I still go back to that bar I took in 1987, my first bar. And I still occasionally, once every 5 years, will have a nightmare about it, that I woke up too late or something, because that's how much it impacted me. It's a competitive exam, not because of the substantive knowledge. You're going to over prepare. You all are going to have bar stuff up to wazoo. It's because of the mental state that you have to be in. That's the competition, not the information. You're going to know the information if you, I think y'all still have Barbary and all that. Take the bar review courses. I think you all do things online now. We did it in person, and however you learn, but you got to put in the time. That's number one. No shortcuts. This is not the time to use your natural brilliance and intellectual fortitude to think you'll make it through the bar. It's not that kind of party. It's not that kind of exam. And that's not the approach. If you have, a lot of people don't have the luxury of just studying for the bar. They have to work. They have a family. They don't have a place where they can study that's quiet. This is a time where you beg your family, you beg your friends, so that you can have a quiet place. If you're working, you must have concentrated time that you can devote to preparation. It's very competitive in that sense. You've got to prepare. But the most important thing is your state of mind. Knowing that you prepared. I recall I took the early bird, which was administered in March back in the day. I don't know if they still do this. We're talking 1987, yes. So in March of 1986, they offered the early bird, which I took. And the early bird, it gives you like a preview because I'm not great at standardized testing. I was great at every other testing, but standardized testing, not so good. So I knew that I had to work hard. There was no, I'm going to naturally just absorb it and it's good. No, I was not that type of student. So I needed to take the early bird to prepare me for the actual bar review class. So I took the early bird. And when I was testing on the early bird, I remember, saying prayers and everything because I never did well. Most of the time I didn't get 50% of the questions right. And I was like, I did take drama a little bit, but I was just like, this is not going to end well. And I'm going to lose my job. These are the things that are going through my mind. I took the early bird, then I took the bar review class, which I think began in June or July or May, maybe, because it's right after you graduate. See, I still have a little fog about this. And I And I took that and I was able to just devote the time to that. I had this, we didn't have cell phones and all that, but I had this deal with my mom who I talked to every day. I said to her, okay, Sunday. She was like, only on Sundays. Like, Sunday, mommy, that's it, Sunday. We can't, I don't have, because you can't afford to be distracted. If you have a significant other, you need to tell your significant other, you need to, until I get through this bar preparation and take the bar, we just have to have a different type of engagement, you know, just for this period of time. You need to be focused. If you don't have a choice, you have to work, carve out time in the morning before work and after, where every single day you're doing questions. Practice is how you get it done. Just continue practicing. And then build in, if it's workout time, whatever you do to relax, going, well, we can't go to church, but watch church services, whatever helps you, you need to do that too, because it's very rigorous. But at the end of the day, you're going to know the information. Students, please hear me on this. You will know the information. You just have to believe and have the right frame of mind on the day you take that test. The 2 days that you take the test, or in California, it might be 3 days. Frame of mind, get some sleep. You must get good sleep, just basic things, and believe that you can take it. It's competitive, but it's not you and everybody else. It's you and that book. Now, when it comes to the written part of the test, my handwriting is illegible under all circumstances. Always illegible. But what I did for the written part of the test, you remember the IRAC method? Dean Lawson, do you still teach the IRAC method? This is what I did. And I literally, because remember, people are grading it, they're looking for points. And if they can't read your handwriting, you're gonna get a big 0. So make sure if you have bad handwriting, every other line, write every other line, and you need to print quickly or do something, but it's got to be legible. And for the buzzwords, because all it is buzzwords, issue spotting, make sure that's legible and try to be as legible as you can. But use the IRAC method for every single question. Issue, wait, I don't even know, rule, analysis, conclusion. Is that it, IRAC? It's been such a long time, my goodness. But my last bar exam wasn't a long time ago. I took my last bar exam when I became a member of the Florida bar. And that was humiliating because I was like in my late 30s with 23-year-olds, you know what I mean? That was a little bit of a humiliating experience, but Florida has no reciprocity. But my point is, whether you do it when you're a certain age or do it right now when you're in law school, you got to take it seriously. You cannot wing it. There's no winging. No winging. You have to build building blocks. You start with this lesson. That lesson is going to help you with the next lesson in a certain, and there's a rule called the rule against perpetuities. I pray for you all with the rule against perpetuities. Today, I've taken so many bars, I do not know what that means. It's 21 plus something, I don't know. I will never get the rule against perpetuities. Sometimes you look at a question, you pray and you just guess, put a C or something like that. You know, you have A to Z. I will never understand the rule against perpetuities, but I had to figure that that's probably going to be 1 or 2 questions. But other things you might be better at. And it's the approach. Instinctively, after doing it a long time, you'll be able to eliminate, you have 4 answers in the multi-state. You'll be able to eliminate 2, and then it's going to be a tough call between the remaining 2. That's where doing it over and over and over again kicks in. Syntax, you know, there's a book from Shrunken White. What's it called? That little thin book. It's a great book on grammar. I don't remember. I have it in my office, and my office, not my home office, but it's an excellent book. Do a little refresher on grammar, on syntax, because part of the exam is just word choice, word organization. But when you do the testing, you will learn that instinctively. And the difference between those last 2 questions, instinct. And then finally, you must just pray. You've got to pray. Whoever or whatever you worship, you hopefully you worship all the time, meaning it always in your life, not just when bad things or difficult things are about to happen, but be a believer, believe in yourself, but pray too. Pray that you have the state of mind not to freak out when you go, when they say, okay, you can begin. You know, that's a freak out moment. That can be a freak out moment for many of us. And that you have the right number, I think it's number 2 pencils. Don't go with the number 1 pencil or number 5 pencil, number 3. Do exactly what they need. Get 10 of them in case you're running out, if it's a pencil or ink, whatever it is, comply, have little snacks so that, you know, when you're able to eat the snacks, they may not, I don't know if they allow you in the room, I just don't remember anymore. But if they do, eat the snacks. This is not the time to be on a starvation diet, to be on the master cleanse, to cleanse your system, to try to be body beautiful. All of that, no. Do that after. You need to be comfortable. Don't wear anything that's going to make you uncomfortable. Nothing should be tight. You're there in a competitive process as a warrior. So if you're in war, you got to be comfortable. And it's you and that book. That's what it is. So that's my advice. Remember, I went back to those takeaways: work hard, be prepared. That's what you can control. And you're going to do that. Yes.
Refuse to be denied.
Refuse to be denied. That's right. Refuse to be denied. Refuse to be denied. So let's talk about the unlikely thing that will happen, that could happen. It's unlikely. It's not going to happen because you refuse to be denied. But let's just say things happen and maybe you don't make it the first time, you just take it again. You regroup. Don't let that cloud your vision. You regroup. Some of the most phenomenal, successful lawyers in the world may not have passed the bar the first time. Your feelings get hurt and everything and all that. You cry, whatever, all that, and you get back up and you do it again. Don't let that change your path. You must refuse to be denied the success that you know you're going to get. But you're going to do it on the first time. But just know, in the event something happens, you still get up and you do it. You do it.
I want to let President Armstrong jump in for a moment.
So I just want to thank our students for those wonderful questions. They were fantastic. And of course, thank President Hoffler. Two things I'll say is that Herm Edwards, the coach of the Arizona State University, former NFL coach and player, has a great line. He says, you know, people always criticize me because I'm old school. He says, no, I am right school. And today you all got to attend right school from President Hoffler. And President Hoffler, we have to hang out at some point because I went to law school in 86 to 89. And literally you had me laughing out loud about Nexus Lexus and Shepherds and all that stuff. So God bless you. Thank you so much for being here to really put our students on a great path. And so proud of our students always, but what a great message you had today. So God bless you and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're an inspiration to us all.
Well, thank you so much to everyone. And to our students, I'm going to leave you with a Portuguese expression. And if I could see all of you, I would say, and free something for the first person who can translate it. And it's a luta continua, vitória é certa. What that means is the struggle continues. Victory is certain. The struggle is where you are right now in law school. Struggle through it, get through it. COVID, no COVID, some COVID, get through it, refuse to be denied. Victory is on the other side because you continue to push towards success.
Amen. And thank you again. And I would say, and our conversation continues, and our support for our students continues from the National Bar Association and from all of our supporters and attendees. We had some bar members that are alums and graduates. We had one of our judges on President Hoffler. So anyway, thank you all for attending and participating in our Black History Month presentation. And this concludes our program for today.
Bye-bye.